Close your eyes and imagine this moment. You're walking through a quiet forest 45,000 years ago. The sun filters through the ancient trees, casting long shadows on the ground. Everything feels peaceful, almost magical, but you're witnessing something that will change the course of human history forever. Two groups of people are about to meet for the first time. They look different from each other, speak different languages, use different tools. One group has lived in this land for hundreds of thousands of years. The other group has just arrived from a distant continent. Neither group knows they're about to create you. Yes, you. Because if you're listening to this story right now, there's a very good chance you carry the DNA of both groups flowing through your veins. You are living proof of what happened between these two kinds of humans so long ago. This is the story of the Neanderthals and us, Homo sapiens. But it's not the story you learned in school. It's darker, more complex, and far more human than anyone wants to admit. It's a story of love and war, of survival and extinction, of how two species became one through the most intimate act possible. Every single person whose ancestors left Africa carries between 1% and 4% Neanderthal genes. That's not theory. That's hard science proven by thousands of genetic tests. You might have inherited their powerful immune system, their ability to survive in cold weather, maybe even the distinctive shape of your nose or the colour of your hair. But here's what makes this story so haunting. While you carry their genes, their species is extinct. Gone, vanished from the Earth around 28,000 years ago. So what really happened between us and them? Was it war that wiped them out? Was it love that preserved them? Or was it something far more complicated that challenges everything we think we know about human nature? Take a moment to think about this. What if the way Neanderthals disappeared holds the key to understanding how humans behave when they meet others who are different? What if their story is actually our story just beginning? If you're finding this journey through human history as fascinating as I am, hit that like button to help others discover these incredible stories. And I'm curious where in the world you're listening from tonight. Drop your city in the comments. Last week we had listeners from Tokyo to Toronto, and it's amazing to think we're all connected by these ancient genes. Chapter 2, Masters of Ice and Stone. Let's travel back 600,000 years to understand who the Neanderthals really were. Forget everything you think you know about cavemen with clubs. That image is completely wrong based on one arthritic skeleton from 1908. Scientists looked at his bent spine and assumed all Neanderthals walked hunched over. They couldn't have been more mistaken. Real Neanderthals were magnificent. Picture someone built like a professional wrestler, but smarter. Males averaged around 5'5" and weighed about 85 pounds of pure muscle. Their arm bones were so thick and dense you could probably use them as weapons. Studies of their skeletons show muscle attachment points that would make modern bodybuilders jealous. The strongest Neanderthals could lift over half a ton. Half a ton? Think about that as you drift off to sleep tonight. These weren't primitive brutes. They were humans engineered by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to survive in the harshest environments on Earth. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. Their brains were bigger than ours. Not just proportionally bigger, actually bigger. The average Neanderthal brain measured 1/600 cubic centimeters. Modern humans average around 150. The largest Neanderthal brain ever found measured 1/3 cubic centimeters. That's one of the biggest human brains ever recorded. Does bigger mean smarter? Not exactly. Their brains were organized differently than ours. They had massive visual processing areas in the back of their skulls. This makes perfect sense when you understand their world. They lived at higher latitudes where winters were dark and brutal. They needed to see in low-light conditions, track prey at dawn, hunt during long twilight hours. But all that brain space dedicated to vision meant less space for other things. The frontal areas where we process complex social interactions, where we plan far into the future, where we think abstractly about possibilities that don't exist yet. Those areas were smaller in Neanderthals. They were brilliant, but their intelligence worked differently than ours. Their bodies were perfect for their world. Short limbs to conserve heat, barrel chests that housed enormous lungs, They could breathe in massive amounts of oxygen to fuel their incredible muscles. Those muscles were different from ours too, packed with fast-twitch fibers built for explosive power rather than endurance. Their distinctive faces weren't ugly or primitive, they were adaptations. That large nose wasn't just for smelling, it was designed to warm, freezing air before it reached their lungs. When you're surviving Ice Age winters in Europe, every adaptation matters. These remarkable people survived for over 300,000 years. They lived through multiple ice ages, hunted woolly mammoths and cave bears that could kill you in seconds, and they did it with intelligence, planning, and something else that might surprise you. They did it with compassion. What does it mean that we carry the genes of people so perfectly adapted to survival? What traits did we inherit from these masters of ice and stone? Chapter 3. When Two Worlds Collided. Around 60,000 years ago, something changed forever. Modern humans, our direct ancestors, began leaving Africa in massive waves. Not just a few explorers, but thousands of people pushing north into the Middle East, then spreading east into Asia and west into Europe. Neanderthal territory. For over 100,000 years, the two species had occasionally bumped into each other in places like the Levant, the region around modern Israel and Lebanon. There's genetic evidence of these early encounters dating back on 20,000 years. But those were just brief meetings, temporary overlaps. This was different. This was an invasion. Imagine you're a Neanderthal living in Europe. Your people have called these valleys home for hundreds of thousands of years. You know every cave, every migration route of the animals you hunt, every source of fresh water. This is your ancestral homeland. Then strangers appear. They look different. Taller, more slender, with flat faces and prominent chins. They speak languages you can't understand. They use weapons you've never seen before. They move in larger groups than you're used to. They're taking the best hunting grounds, the caves your grandparents used, the territories your people have defended for generations. What do you do? The archaeological record gives us clues, and they paint a picture that's both beautiful and terrifying. At sites across Europe and the Middle East, archaeologists find evidence that both species were living in the same areas at the same time. They were definitely encountering each other regularly. But were they neighbours, trading partners, or were they enemies? Here's where the story gets controversial. There's evidence of violence, but not a lot. A Neanderthal skull from France shows a healed fracture from a blow to the head delivered by a sharp weapon. Someone hit this person hard enough to crack their skull, but they survived. More disturbing is a rib bone from Iraq. Embedded in that rib is a wound from a projectile weapon, a throwing spear or dart, the kind of advanced weapon modern humans had perfected, but Neanderthals never developed. The wound started to heal, but analysis suggests this person died within weeks, probably from lung damage. So we have what looks like evidence that a modern human killed a Neanderthal with superior technology. But is one case proof of war? Or just evidence that two groups of humans, competing for the same resources, sometimes fought over them? Think about this as you listen tonight. Is violence between different groups inevitable? Or could these two species have found a way to share the world? The answer is more complex than you might expect, because while there's evidence of conflict, there's also evidence of something else entirely. Something that created the very genes you carry today. Chapter 4. The Evidence of Violence. Let's examine the darker side of this story, because understanding it helps us understand ourselves. When researchers analysed trauma patterns in Neanderthal skeletons and compared them to early modern humans, they found something interesting. Both species showed similar rates of head injuries and broken bones. Life was violent for everyone 40,000 years ago. Hunting mammoth-sized animals with stone-tipped spears was incredibly dangerous. Getting gored by a woolly rhino or trampled by a bison was an occupational hazard, but the patterns of injuries were slightly different between the two species. Neanderthals showed more injuries consistent with close-quarters combat, getting hurt while wrestling prey animals to the ground, taking hits at arm's length. Modern humans showed more distance injuries, more projectile wounds. That makes sense because we'd developed superior throwing weapons. Spear throwers called atlatls could launch a dart at 70 miles per hour from 30 yards away. In a fight between Neanderthals and modern humans, that's a huge advantage. Neanderthals were stronger, tougher, built like tanks. In hand-to-hand combat, they'd probably win. But if modern humans could attack from range, using hit-and-run tactics, the advantage shifted to us. There's another crucial difference. Group size. Genetic analysis suggests Neanderthal populations were small and scattered. They lived in bands of maybe 10 to 20 individuals, with limited contact between groups. Modern humans travelled in larger groups, 30, 50, even 100 people. We had more complex social structures, better communication, wider trade networks. If conflict broke out, we could field more fighters. We had numbers and technology on our side, but here's what's truly chilling to consider. Did we use those advantages to systematically eliminate Neanderthals? Some researchers argue yes. They point to the rapid disappearance of Neanderthal populations wherever modern humans appeared. Within a few thousand years of our arrival in any region, Neanderthals vanished. That's not a coincidence. But war doesn't explain everything, because the genetics tell a completely different story, one that reveals something beautiful and tragic happening alongside any violence. Here's a question that might keep you thinking as you drift off. If two groups are fighting for survival, can love still exist between them? Can individuals see past group differences and connect as human beings? The DNA evidence says yes, they can, and they did. Chapter 5. Love Across Species Lines. This is where our story takes an unexpected turn. While there may have been violence between Neanderthals and modern humans, there was definitely something else happening. Something intimate, personal, and profound. They were having sex, a lot of it. New research published in 2024 pinpointed when this happened. The main period of interbreeding occurred between 47,000 and 43,000 years ago. Not earlier, not later. One specific window when Neanderthals and modern humans were living close enough to form relationships and produce children together. Every single person today whose ancestry traces outside of sub-Saharan Africa carries Neanderthal DNA. East Asians have slightly more, around 2 to 3%. Europeans have about 1 to 2%. But everyone has some. That means our ancestors didn't just fight Neanderthals, they fell in love with them. They saw past the physical differences, the heavy brow ridges, the powerful builds, the distinctive faces, and recognized something human staring back. Think about what that must have looked like. A Neanderthal woman meeting a modern human man, or vice versa. Different languages, different cultures, different ways of understanding the world. But something connected them. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was loneliness, maybe it was simple human attraction that transcends species boundaries. These weren't just random encounters. The genetics show sustained contact over thousands of years. That's thousands of successful relationships that produced children who survived and thrived. Children who grew up in mixed communities, learning from both traditions. But here's something strange. The gene flow was mostly one-directional. Neanderthal genes made it into modern human populations and stuck around. But there's almost no evidence of modern human genes getting into Neanderthal populations. Why? The answer reveals something disturbing about what might have been happening. Maybe Neanderthal women were having children with modern human men, but those children were raised in modern human communities where they had better chances of survival. Or maybe, and this is darker, maybe modern human groups were taking Neanderthal women by force. Throughout history, when one human group conquers another, they often kill the men and take the women. It's one of the dark constants of human behaviour. Could our ancestors have done this to Neanderthals? The genetics would fit that pattern. But it's also possible that the relationships were consensual, based on genuine connection. Maybe modern human groups were simply more welcoming to outsiders, more willing to integrate people who look different. We'll never know for sure. What we do know is that some of those Neanderthal genes we inherited turned out to be incredibly valuable. They gave us better immune systems for fighting European diseases. They helped us adapt to cold climates faster than evolution alone would allow. In some cases, mixing with Neanderthals made us more successful, not less. So were these relationships acts of love or acts of war? Probably both, depending on the individuals involved and the circumstances they found themselves in. Here's something to ponder. What does it mean that love and violence can exist side by side? That the same species capable of warfare is also capable of seeing past differences and forming intimate bonds? If you're enjoying this exploration of human nature, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that help you understand who we really are. Chapter 6: The Disease Weapon. Now we come to perhaps the darkest chapter in this story, one that reveals how extinction can happen not through dramatic battles, but through invisible killers that no one even knows they're carrying. Modern humans evolved in Africa, the disease capital of the planet. Tropical regions have more pathogens, more parasites, more deadly microbes than anywhere else on Earth. Our ancestors developed immune systems battle-tested against an enormous array of diseases. We were walking biological weapons factories. When we left Africa and spread north, we brought those diseases with us. Neanderthals had never encountered them before. No immunity, no resistance, no genetic memory of how to fight off African pathogens. It's exactly what happened when Europeans reached the Americas. Native American populations had been isolated for thousands of years. When smallpox and measles arrived with colonizers, it was catastrophic. 90% death rates in some regions. Entire civilizations collapsed not from warfare, but from disease. Could the same thing have happened to Neanderthals? Mathematical models suggest it absolutely could have been a major factor. When two populations separated for hundreds of thousands of years suddenly come into contact, disease exchange is inevitable. And if one population carries a heavier disease load, that's a weapon more devastating than any sword. The models show something fascinating and cruel. At first, when modern humans and Neanderthals met, there would have been a disease barrier. Both groups would have been vulnerable to each other's pathogens. Moving into enemy territory would have meant certain death from unfamiliar diseases. That might explain why it took so long for modern humans to really expand into Europe. We reached the Middle East over 100,000 years ago, but didn't push deep into Europe until 45,000 years ago. What changed? The answer might be interbreeding. Hybrid children would have inherited immune genes from both species. As those genes spread through both populations, the disease barrier would have gradually lowered. Eventually, there'd be enough cross-immunity that migration became possible. But here's the cruel twist. If modern humans started with more diseases, we'd reach that tipping point first. We'd be able to move into Neanderthal territory while they were still vulnerable to our pathogens. Once we did, we'd overwhelm them not with weapons, but with microbes they couldn't see or fight. It's a heartbreaking thought. The idea that we might have accidentally genocided our closest relatives with diseases we didn't even know we were carrying. But it fits the timeline perfectly. Modern humans expand into Europe around 45,000 years ago. Within 5,000 years, Neanderthals are gone. That's not much time in evolutionary terms. Something dramatic happened. Disease could explain the speed of Neanderthal collapse better than warfare alone. Imagine being a Neanderthal in those final generations. Your people are getting sick and dying from mysterious illness. Children are born weak and don't survive. Elders who should be passing on knowledge are dying too young. Your bands are getting smaller, more scattered, less able to maintain the cultural traditions that define who you are. You don't understand why this is happening. You can't see the microbes killing your people. You just know that everywhere those strange new humans appear, your people start disappearing. What would that feel like? How would you make sense of such an invisible, unstoppable enemy? As you think about that tonight, consider this. Are we still carrying diseases that could wipe out other populations? In our interconnected world, could something similar happen again? Chapter 7: Territory and Survival. Beyond disease and direct violence, there's another factor that probably doomed the Neanderthals. Simple competition for resources in a world that was getting harder to survive in. Between 50,000 and 30,000 years ago, the climate was incredibly unstable. Wild temperature swings, dramatic shifts in vegetation, ice sheets advancing and retreating. The massive Ice Age animals that Neanderthals depended on, those woolly mammoths, giant bears and cave lions, they were struggling too. Climate change alone might have pushed Neanderthals to the edge, but it doesn't explain why modern humans thrived in exactly the same conditions. We actually expanded during those same climatic upheavals. So what was different about us? The answer lies in how we approached survival. Modern humans had more sophisticated strategies. We used nets and traps. We fished with hooks and spears. We gathered a much wider variety of plant foods. Our diet was more diverse, more flexible. Archaeological sites show we had trade networks stretching hundreds of miles, shell beads from the Mediterranean showing up in Central Europe, high-quality flint from one region being worked into tools at sites hundreds of miles away. That kind of long-distance exchange meant we could buffer against local resource shortages. If one area was experiencing famine, you could trade for food from somewhere else. If local flint was poor quality, you could get better stone from distant quarries. We had economic insurance policies that Neanderthals lacked. Neanderthals did have some trade, but on a much smaller scale. Most of their tools were made from materials found within a few miles of where they lived. Their social networks were smaller, more isolated. When resources failed locally, they had fewer options. That isolation might have been their downfall. Small, scattered populations are vulnerable in ways large, connected populations aren't. If a harsh winter killed half a Neanderthal band, that group might never recover. They might not have enough people left to maintain their hunting territories or pass on essential knowledge. Modern humans, with our larger groups and wider networks, could absorb those kinds of losses more easily. We had redundancy, backup systems, more people to share the burden when times got tough. But there's something else that gave us an even bigger advantage: our ability to innovate and share those innovations rapidly through cultural transmission. Neanderthals were smart, no question. They made sophisticated tools, adapted to harsh environments, survived for hundreds of thousands of years, but their technology remained relatively stable over long periods. The same basic tool types appearing again and again across millennia. Modern human technology, by contrast, exploded in diversity and sophistication. New tool types appearing, old ones being refined, constant innovation and improvement. We were better at learning from each other, better at building on past discoveries, better at spreading good ideas quickly through our populations. That's a massive advantage in competition. If someone in your group invents a better hunting technique and you can teach it to everyone else within a generation, your whole population becomes more effective. If innovations stay local or get lost when the inventor dies, progress is much slower. What's truly tragic is that Neanderthals tried to keep up. At multiple sites, archaeologists find evidence of Neanderthals copying modern human technologies. Blade tools, bone implements, even decorative beads and pendants. They could see we had better stuff and they tried to figure out how to make it themselves. But copying isn't the same as innovating. They could imitate our designs, but they couldn't improve on them or come up with new applications. They were always one step behind in a competition where being current meant life or death. Think about this. In a world of rapid change, is it better to be strong and traditional or flexible and adaptive? The Neanderthal story suggests that adaptability beats strength when environments change quickly. What does that mean for us today, in our rapidly changing world? Chapter 8. The Final Refuges. By 35,000 years ago, Neanderthals were in full retreat. Region by region, their numbers dwindled. The archaeological record shows modern human sites replacing Neanderthal sites across Europe. New tools, new art, new ways of life spreading like wildfire. But it wasn't a clean replacement. At some sites we find evidence of back and forth occupation. Layers with Neanderthal tools, then modern human tools, then Neanderthal again. Some territories changed hands multiple times, suggesting there was ongoing competition, with neither side able to gain permanent control initially. Even more intriguingly, at a few sites archaeologists found hybrid tool technologies. Stone implements that combine Neanderthal and modern human techniques, as if someone was learning from both traditions. That suggests cultural exchange, maybe even cooperation between the species. At Roc de Combe in France, researchers found a Neanderthal site with shell beads and bone tools typical of modern humans. For years, scientists debated whether Neanderthals made these themselves or stole them from nearby modern human camps. Recent evidence suggests they made them independently. They were adapting, learning, trying to keep up with our innovations. That makes their final extinction even more heartbreaking. These weren't primitive beings unable to change. They were intelligent people desperately trying to survive in a world that was leaving them behind. By 30,000 years ago, Neanderthals were down to their last refuges. Southern Spain, Gibraltar, isolated pockets protected by mountains and sea. Remote enough that modern humans hadn't fully penetrated. Not yet. Those final Neanderthal populations held out for maybe another 2,000 years. Imagine what that must have been like, knowing your people were disappearing everywhere else, watching strangers take over territories your ancestors had held for thousands of generations, feeling the world shrink around you until you were trapped in a few valleys, a handful of caves, the last of your kind. Did they understand what was happening? Did they have stories about the old days when their people were numerous? Did they know they were the end of the line? The last Neanderthal who ever lived was born around 28,000 years ago in southern Spain. They grew up in a world dominated by the modern humans. They probably never met another Neanderthal outside their tiny isolated band. They were alone in a way we can barely imagine. When they died, an entire species died with them. Hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, adaptation, and culture. Gone, an entire way of being human, erased from the earth. But not completely, because those hybrid children born 45,000 years ago had passed on Neanderthal genes that survived in modern human populations. In a strange way, Neanderthals didn't go extinct. They were absorbed, integrated, transformed into something new. We are their continuation. Every person listening to this story carries pieces of Neanderthal DNA. You have their genes for immune function, cold weather adaptation, maybe even aspects of brain structure. They live on through you. Is that justice? Is that redemption? Or is it just another form of conquest? Not just taking their land, but taking their very genetic essence and making it our own? The answer depends on how you look at it. But one thing is certain. The story of Neanderthals isn't ancient history. It's ongoing, playing out in every human alive today who carries their genetic legacy. What responsibility do we have to honor that legacy? How should we remember the species we helped disappear? Chapter 9: Living Ghosts in Our DNA. Here's something that will change how you think about yourself. Scientists can now map exactly which parts of your genome came from Neanderthals, and it turns out those genes aren't randomly scattered through your DNA. They're concentrated in specific regions doing important jobs. Some boost your immune system, helping you fight off viruses that your African ancestors never encountered. Others affect your skin and hair, helping you adapt to northern climates. There are even Neanderthal genes that influence how your brain develops, though scientists are still figuring out exactly what they do. But here's what's really strange. A lot of Neanderthal DNA has been disappearing from human populations over the past 40,000 years. Natural selection has been slowly removing it, weeding out variants that don't work well in modern human bodies. The genes that remain are the useful ones, the ones that help rather than hurt. We've essentially been conducting a 40,000-year experiment in genetic optimization, keeping the best parts of Neanderthal biology while discarding the rest. Scientists studying ancient DNA from early modern humans found something shocking. People who lived 45,000 years ago had up to 9% Neanderthal DNA. Compare that to the 1 to 4% in modern populations. That's a massive reduction. What happened to all that missing Neanderthal DNA? Natural selection removed it because it was causing problems. Genes that affected fertility, brain development, metabolism. If they didn't work well in modern human bodies, they got eliminated over hundreds of generations. The process is still ongoing. Even today, Neanderthal genes are being slowly removed from human populations. We can track this by comparing DNA from different time periods and different populations around the world. But some Neanderthal genes are not just surviving, they're thriving. Genes that help process fats and proteins, genes that boost immune responses to certain viruses, genes that help people live at high altitudes. These variants are actually becoming more common in some populations because they provide real advantages. You're carrying both kinds. Helpful Neanderthal genes that make you better adapted to your environment, and harmful ones that natural selection is slowly weeding out. You're a living battlefield where ancient genetic variants compete for survival. Think about that as you drift off tonight. Part of your DNA comes from people who went extinct 28,000 years ago. Their genetic information is still active in your cells, still influencing how your body works, still shaping who you are. In a very real sense, Neanderthals aren't extinct. They're dormant, scattered across the genomes of billions of humans. Every baby born outside Africa has a chance of inheriting Neanderthal traits. The shape of their skull, their immune responses, maybe even how their brain processes information. We are their descendants as much as we're descended from African Homo sapiens. That should change how we think about human diversity, about what it means to be purely anything. Because if we're all carrying DNA from extinct species, if we're all genetic mosaics built from different evolutionary experiments, then what does racial purity even mean? What does it mean to be purely European, or purely Asian, or purely human? The answers get complicated fast. Biology doesn't respect our categories. It never has. Evolution mixes and matches whatever works, taking genes from anywhere and cobbling together something new. That's what we are. Genetic collages assembled from African Homo sapiens, Eurasian Neanderthals, and other extinct human species we're still discovering. We're not one thing, we're many things, all mixed together over thousands of years of encounters between different kinds of human. If you're finding these genetic revelations as mind-blowing as I am, make sure to share this video with friends who might enjoy learning about their ancient heritage. Chapter 10: The Laboratory Resurrection. Now we enter the realm of science fiction becoming science fact. Researchers can actually recreate Neanderthal cells in laboratories. Not cloning them, not bringing them back to life, but editing modern human cells to carry Neanderthal genes and watching what happens. They take stem cells and modify specific genes to match Neanderthal versions. Then they grow these cells and observe how they behave differently from normal human cells. It's like resurrecting tiny pieces of Neanderthals one gene at a time, one cell at a time. What they're discovering is fascinating and disturbing. Neanderthal versions of brain development genes cause cells to organize differently, form different patterns, connect in different ways. These aren't huge differences, but they're measurable, significant. They show that Neanderthal brains literally work differently than ours at the most basic cellular level. Not better or worse necessarily, just different. Optimized for different kinds of thinking, different ways of processing information. Some researchers are growing mini brains, tiny clumps of brain tissue that develop in laboratory dishes. They can edit these organoids to carry Neanderthal genes and watch how they grow compared to normal human versions. It sounds like science fiction, but it's happening right now in labs around the world. We're slowly reconstructing what made Neanderthals unique, what made them think and feel and experience the world differently than we do. With each discovery, the picture becomes more complex. Neanderthals weren't failed humans or primitive versions of us. They were successful humans, just successful in different ways, adapted to different environments, optimized for different challenges. They survived for over 300,000 years. That's longer than modern humans have existed as a species. They were doing something right. The fact that they went extinct doesn't diminish that achievement. Extinction is normal in evolution. Over 99% of all species that ever lived are extinct now. It's the default outcome. The strange thing isn't that Neanderthals went extinct. It's that we haven't yet. Because we're not immune to extinction. We're not special or protected. We're subject to the same evolutionary forces that eliminated Neanderthals. If the right combination of challenges emerged, new diseases, climate change, resource depletion, competition from something better adapted, we could disappear just as completely as they did. The only reason we're still here is that we haven't faced that perfect storm yet, but eventually we will, maybe in 1,000 years, maybe in 1,000,000. But eventually something will challenge humanity in ways we can't overcome. When that happens, will we go extinct? Or will we do what our ancestors did with Neanderthals, adapt by mixing with whoever is better suited to survive? We're already heading in that direction. Genetic engineering, designer babies, the ability to choose which genes our children inherit. In 50 years, humans might be able to edit themselves, optimize their biology for whatever challenges they face. Is that still human? Or is it something new, a different species entirely? The lines blur just like they blurred between Neanderthals and modern humans 45,000 years ago. There's no pure human form we're supposed to maintain, no perfect blueprint we need to preserve. Just constant change, constant adaptation, constant mixing and reshuffling of genetic possibilities. Maybe that's the real lesson from Neanderthals, that clinging to identity too tightly is dangerous, that refusing to change is evolutionary suicide, that survival requires flexibility, willingness to become something new when circumstances demand it. Neanderthals couldn't adapt fast enough to compete with us. We could, at least so far. But the future is uncertain and change is accelerating. Will we adapt fast enough to whatever comes next, or will we become the Neanderthals in someone else's story, the proud, powerful species that couldn't keep up when the world shifted around them? As you drift off to sleep tonight, carrying Neanderthal genes in every cell of your body, remember that you are proof that love can transcend species, that mixing creates strength, and that even extinction isn't truly final if something of you survives in others. The story of Neanderthals and us isn't ancient history. It's still being written in our DNA, still unfolding in laboratories, still teaching us about what it means to be human in a universe where nothing stays the same forever. Sweet dreams, and remember, you are the continuation of an epic love story that began 45,000 years ago and continues in you tonight.